there was one moment that flipped everything on its head. Not a bad throw, not a missed read, not even the final score. It was something far smaller, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention, and that's exactly why it mattered so much. In freezing Chicago air, with the entire football world watching, Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field carrying information he couldn't use. The wrong wristband, the wrong plays, and within seconds, the night spiraled into something nobody could explain. This wasn't just a rookie struggling. This wasn't a defense getting beat. This was a quarterback standing at the center of an NFL offense, searching the sideline because he didn't know what he was supposed to run. Confusion turned into panic. Panic turned into a delay of game flag. And suddenly, the broadcast booth went quiet in a way you almost never hear, because this kind of thing doesn't happen. Not at this level, not to a starting quarterback. Then came the explanation, or at least what was supposed to be one. Kevin Stefanski brushed it off as a miscommunication. Something got on the wristband, or whatever it was fixed quickly. That was the official story, but the words didn't land the way they were supposed to. Fans didn't hear clarity. They heard distance, vagueness, a coach talking around a moment instead of through it. Social media exploded within minutes, not with analysis of Sanders' stat line, but with disbelief. People weren't arguing about reads or mechanics. They were asking a different question entirely. How does a professional football organization send its quarterback into a game without the right information? And more importantly, how often does something like this happen without anyone noticing? What made it even stranger was what happened next. Shedeur Sanders didn't push back. He didn't sound confused. He didn't express frustration. He echoed the same explanation almost word for word. The card fell out. That was it. Simple, clean, identical. To some, that sounded like unity. Quarterback and coach aligned. To others, it sounded rehearsed, like damage control. Like two people sticking to a script because the alternative raised too many questions. And that's when fans started connecting dots, not just from this game, but from everything that came before it. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur Sanders' performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. Because once you notice the wristband, you can't unsee the pattern, the lack of reps, the strange sidelines decisions, the moments where momentum died without explanation. This wasn't being framed as one bad night anymore. It was being viewed as the clearest example yet of something deeper, whether that's dysfunction, incompetence, or something people are still afraid to say out loud. And that's why this moment matters more than the interceptions, more than the score, more than the cold, because bad games happen, mistakes happen, but this wasn't about execution. It was about preparation, trust, and whether Shedeur Sanders was ever truly set up to succeed. And once that question enters the conversation, it doesn't go away. What happened on that field in Chicago wasn't just unusual. It was almost unheard of. Because in the NFL, play call wristbands aren't optional accessories. They are the backbone of communication, especially for young quarterbacks. Every formation, every audible, every contingency is laid out in detail. When that system breaks, the entire offense collapses. And that's exactly what the cameras captured. Early in the game, Fox sideline reporter Allison Williams dropped a detail that instantly changed how the night was viewed. Shedeur Sanders' wristband had been removed after the first quarter. Not adjusted, not tweaked, removed. The Browns had to replace the play sheet entirely. That alone raised eyebrows, but what followed raised alarms. Sanders wasn't just struggling to execute. He didn't know what was coming next. On multiple snaps, he sprinted toward the sideline looking for answers. You could see it on his face, confusion, urgency, disbelief. Then the flag came out, delay of game. The booth went silent not because the play failed, but because everyone understood what that moment implied. This wasn't a misread. This was a quarterback without a roadmap. Situations like this don't happen by accident. At least, that's what fans kept repeating. NFL teams rehearse these processes endlessly. Wristbands are checked, double-checked, memorized, practiced. For something this basic to unravel during live action felt less like a fluke and more like a breakdown somewhere higher up the chain. When Kevin Stefanski was asked about it afterward, the explanation only poured fuel on the fire. He described it as a miscommunication. Something got on the wristband, or whatever it was. That phrase, or whatever it was, became the centerpiece of the backlash, because it didn't sound like certainty. It sounded like someone minimizing something they didn't want to expand on. Fans weren't just mad, they were suspicious. Within minutes, clips were circulating online, slowed down, replayed, dissected. People weren't arguing about whether the wristband was wrong. That part was confirmed. They were asking how it was possible in the first place, and why the response felt so dismissive. The performance that followed only intensified the narrative. Sanders finished 18 for 35, 3 interceptions, 5 sacks, a lopsided loss. On paper, it looked like a rookie meltdown, but to many watching, the stats felt misleading. How do you fairly judge a quarterback who didn't have the right plays in his hands? That's when the narrative cracked, because if the wristband issue was real, and everyone agreed it was, then the entire evaluation of Sanders in that game became questionable. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about whether he struggled. It was about whether he was put in an impossible situation from the start. And once that door opened, fans weren't willing to close it. Because this wasn't just about one mistake in Chicago. It was about whether this mistake fit into a pattern that had been building quietly all season long. What made the wristband situation feel even more unsettling wasn't just what happened on the field. It was what happened after, when the microphones were on and the answers were supposed to bring clarity. Instead, they raised even more questions. Kevin Stefanski spoke first. Calm, measured, detached. He framed the entire situation as minor, a miscommunication, something got on the wristband, or whatever it was, fixed quickly. End of story. No follow-up, no explanation of how it happened, no acknowledgement of how disruptive it was for a rookie quarterback in a hostile environment, just a shrug disguised as reassurance. Then Shedeur Sanders stepped to the podium. And that's when people leaned in. Because instead of offering his own perspective, Sanders echoed the same explanation almost word for word. The card fell out. That was it. No frustration, no confusion. No hint that anything unusual had taken place. It was clean, almost too clean, as if the talking points had already been agreed upon. For some fans, this sounded like maturity. A young quarterback protecting his coach, keeping things in-house, not throwing anyone under the bus. That's the kind of leadership teams claim to want. But for others, it felt off. Not because Sanders stayed composed, but because the messaging was so perfectly aligned. Identical explanations don't always signal unity. Sometimes they signal control. Online, the conversation shifted quickly. People weren't debating whether Sanders believed what he was saying. They were debating why he felt the need to say it that way. Rumors started circulating that the organization wanted the incident minimized. That acknowledging confusion would open a door the Browns weren't ready to walk through. None of that has been confirmed, but the speculation didn't come from nowhere. It came from the silence around the details that mattered most. Because if the wristband truly just fell out, then why was it changed entirely? Why did Sanders look so lost before the delay of game flag? Why did it take so long to correct? Those questions were never addressed. And when obvious gaps go unanswered, fans fill them in themselves. The timing also mattered. This wasn't early preseason. This wasn't garbage time. This was a late season start with the spotlight firmly on Sanders. The stakes were real. Evaluations were happening in real time. And yet the official message was that nothing significant occurred. That disconnect is what raised eyebrows. Veteran quarterbacks are usually given space to explain chaos. Rookies rarely are. They're expected to take the blame, own the mistakes, move on. But here, Sanders didn't even take blame. He took the story, word for word. And that made some fans wonder if the truth had been flattened to protect someone else. Whether that's fair or not is still debated, but the result was undeniable. Instead of closing the book on the wristband incident, the synchronized messaging kept it alive. It turned a strange moment into a lingering question. And once people started questioning what they were being told, they began re-examining everything they'd been shown before. To understand why the wristband incident hit such a nerve, you have to go back to the very beginning, before the interceptions, before the noise, before the narratives hardened. Back to the moment Shedeur Sanders first stepped onto an NFL field in a situation that, in hindsight, feels impossible to justify. Week 11, Cleveland versus Baltimore. The Browns were leading at halftime when the game suddenly shifted. Dylan Gabriel entered concussion protocol, and without warning, Sanders was told he was going in. The crowd erupted. Huntington Bank Field shook. Fans weren't just excited, they were relieved. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The rookie quarterback, the future, finally getting his shot. What they didn't know was what was happening behind the scenes. After the game, Kevin Stefanski confirmed something that stunned even seasoned reporters. That second half was the first time Sanders had ever taken a snap with the starting offense. Not in practice, not in walkthroughs, not in any controlled environment. Ever. The debut fans were celebrating was built on zero real preparation. It got worse. Sanders later admitted that the first pass he ever threw to Jerry Jeudy, his #1 receiver, came during that game. Live action. Against the Ravens. No chemistry, no timing reps, no safety net. Just raw talent thrown into chaos. The result was predictable. Sanders struggled. 4 completions on 16 attempts, 47 yards, 1 interception. A passer rating that immediately became a headline. And just like that, the narrative flipped. The conversation wasn't about why a rookie was unprepared. It was about whether he belonged. That's what frustrated fans the most, because the context vanished overnight. No one led with the fact that Sanders had been dropped into live action cold. Instead, his stat line was treated like proof. Proof that he wasn't ready. Proof that the team made the right choice keeping him on the bench. Proof that the hype was misplaced. But hype wasn't the issue. Infrastructure was. Rookie quarterbacks struggle all the time, but they usually struggle within systems designed to help them. Scripted throws, familiar faces, reps with starters. Sanders had none of that. He was learning on the fly in a real game against one of the league's toughest defenses. And still, the criticism landed almost exclusively on him. Looking back, that debut feels like the first crack in the story fans were being told. If Sanders truly wasn't ready, why wasn't he being prepared? If the organization believed in his future, why was his first NFL experience built on improvisation instead of planning? Those questions didn't dominate headlines at the time. They simmered, quietly, waiting for more moments to give them weight. And when the wristband incident happened months later, fans didn't see it as random. They saw it as familiar. Another example of a quarterback being put in a position where failure was the most likely outcome, long before the ball was ever snapped. If there was ever a moment that should have reset the entire conversation around Shedeur Sanders, it came the very next week. After the chaotic debut, after the stat lines were weaponized against him, Sanders was named the starter for the game in Las Vegas. This time, there were no excuses left on the table. He was getting the job, and what he did with it made the earlier criticism feel rushed at best. On the road, in a hostile environment with pressure mounting, Sanders delivered. The Browns beat the Raiders 24-10, not in dramatic fashion, not with luck, with control. Sanders managed the game, made timely throws, avoided the kind of mistakes rookies are known for, and walked off the field as the first Browns rookie quarterback to win his debut start since 1995. 30 years. That drought ended with him under center. That alone should have earned a moment. But inside the locker room, something felt off. When it came time to hand out the game ball, Sanders' name wasn't called. The only game ball went to Myles Garrett for his 3-sack performance. Garrett deserved recognition. No one argued that. What stunned people was who didn't get one. Sanders was mentioned briefly by Kevin Stefanski. "Nice job, well done." And then the moment passed. That silence spoke louder than the praise. Former players noticed immediately. Shannon Sharpe and Chad Johnson didn't sugarcoat it. They pointed out what most fans didn't know yet, that Sanders had only started getting first-team reps that Wednesday, days before the game. He walked into an unfamiliar system with limited chemistry and still delivered a win that had eluded Cleveland for decades. And all he got was a polite acknowledgement. To Sharpe, that wasn't just oversight, it was messaging. Fans agreed. Gameball Gate took over the timeline. People weren't saying Sanders should have been crowned a superstar. They were asking why a milestone win didn't feel like one. Why the organization seemed reluctant to celebrate a moment that should have unified the locker room and the fan base. That's when speculation started to grow. Quiet at first, then louder. Some fans claimed Stefanski never wanted Sanders to succeed. Others believed the team preferred a different quarterback all along and was simply buying time. None of that was proven, but the fact that it felt believable to so many people was telling. Because moments like that shape perception. And perception matters in a league built on confidence and momentum. That win should have been a turning point, a signal that Sanders had earned trust. Instead, it felt like a footnote. And once fans started watching with that lens, every future decision carried more weight. Not because of what was said publicly, but because of what wasn't. If the Vegas win raised eyebrows, the game against Tennessee erased any remaining excuses. This wasn't about managing the moment or leaning on the defense. This was Shedeur Sanders taking control and doing it in a way that forced the entire league to pay attention. From the opening drive, something felt different. Sanders was aggressive without being reckless, confident without forcing throws. By the time the night ended, he had thrown for 364 yards and 3 touchdowns, added another score on the ground, and etched his name into rare company. Only one other rookie in the Super Bowl era had ever posted 350-plus passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown in the same game. Joe Burrow. And he did it against Cleveland. This time there was no stat you could twist, no context you could ignore. Sanders outplayed Cam Ward, the #1 overall pick, head-to-head, on the same field, under the same lights. And the stadium felt it. Every completion pulled the crowd closer. Every score raised the stakes. This wasn't potential anymore. This was production. Even the people closest to him couldn't hide it. Cameras caught Deion Sanders on the sideline, leaning toward his son, overcome by the moment. He asked if he was okay. Then, uncharacteristically, he let a word slip that said everything about the magnitude of what was happening. Coach Prime doesn't curse, but this moment cracked even his composure. It was raw, human, real. The reaction spilled far beyond the stadium. Jamie Foxx jumped in immediately, posting hype videos, calling out critics, comparing Sanders to Willie Beeman from Any Given Sunday. The message was clear. If you didn't appreciate what you were watching, you didn't appreciate football. The narrative flipped overnight. The same voices questioning whether Sanders belonged were suddenly being drowned out by highlights and praise. Momentum was building fast. The kind of momentum young quarterbacks rarely get to feel this early. And then it stopped. With the game on the line, Cleveland trailed by 2. The decision was obvious to most watching. Let Sanders finish what he started. He had thrown for 364 yards, accounted for 4 touchdowns. He had the defense on its heels. But when the Browns lined up for the decisive 2-point conversion, Sanders was standing on the sideline. Instead, a trick play was called, a running back throwing across the field. The pass fell incomplete. Game over. The stadium went quiet, then the outrage hit. Fans weren't just upset about the loss. They were confused. Why remove the quarterback who had carried the offense all night from the biggest play of the game? Stefanski later said it was simply the play they wanted to run. But to many, that explanation didn't land. Because that call did more than cost them the game. It interrupted something rare: confidence, belief, trust. And once again, Sanders was left watching as a defining moment slipped away through no fault of his own. That failed two-point conversion didn't just end a game. It reignited everything fans had been trying to ignore. Because by this point, the pattern was getting harder to dismiss. It wasn't one bad decision. It was a series of moments that all pointed in the same direction, and this one might have been the loudest yet. The first two-point attempt made sense. Sanders was on the field. The offense trusted him. It failed, but no one questioned the process. That's football. But the second attempt was different. Everything was on the line: momentum, confidence, a signature win. And instead of doubling down on the quarterback who had just delivered the best performance of his young career, the Browns went away from him. The play itself was bizarre. A running back rolling out and throwing across the field. No misdirection that fooled anyone. No backup plan. Just a low-percentage call in the highest leverage moment of the night. When it failed, the reaction was instant. Players looked confused. Fans were furious. And Sanders stood on the sideline, helmet on, watching it unfold. That image stuck. Because it wasn't about second-guessing a play call. It was about trust, or the lack of it. Coaches always talk about rewarding performance, earning opportunities, letting players rise in big moments. And yet, when Sanders had clearly earned that moment, it was taken out of his hands. Kevin Stefanski's explanation afterward didn't calm anyone down. He said it was the play they wanted to run. That sometimes things don't work out. Technically true, emotionally hollow. It didn't address the why. It didn't explain why the hottest player on the field wasn't involved when everything mattered most. That's when fans started using words like optics. Because even if the decision wasn't intentional, it looked bad. Really bad. It felt like another moment where Sanders was asked to carry the weight of the offense, but wasn't trusted with the keys when the stakes were highest. Speculation surged again. Some fans claimed it was overthinking. Others said it was stubbornness. And some went further, arguing it was another example of a coach unwilling to fully commit to his quarterback. None of those claims were proven. But once a fan base starts questioning intent instead of execution, something fundamental has already been lost. This was supposed to be the game that silenced doubts. Instead, it became the game that reopened them. Because the call didn't just cost 2 points. It cost momentum. It added another moment to a growing list that people couldn't explain away. And by the time the team boarded the plane home, the conversation had shifted again. Not about Sanders' talent, but about whether he was being given the same trust other quarterbacks earned far earlier in their careers. As the backlash grew, the defenses came quickly. Insiders close to the organization stepped forward, insisting the narrative had gone too far. They claimed Kevin Stefanski was doing everything right behind the scenes. Extra film sessions, one-on-one time, constant communication. According to those reports, the relationship between coach and quarterback was strong, supportive, built on trust. On paper, it sounded reassuring. But outside that bubble, it wasn't landing. Fans weren't reacting to what was supposedly happening in meeting rooms. They were reacting to what they could see. The benching moments, the play-calling decisions, the missed opportunities, and that disconnect between public defense and visible outcomes only widened the gap. Then Jamie Foxx stepped in. When a Browns insider dismissed the sabotage talk and portrayed Stefanski as a mentor investing heavily in Sanders, Foxx responded with just 3 words. "Knock it off!" No explanation, no elaboration, just rejection. It was blunt, and it resonated. Deion Sanders saw the post and echoed it with a simple "thank you," adding weight without saying much at all. That exchange mattered because it highlighted something fans already felt. This wasn't just about football anymore. It was about perception, about whether the organization was acknowledging the obvious tension or pretending it didn't exist. Around the same time, another detail started drawing attention. The roster around Sanders kept getting thinner. Joe Flacco was gone. Kenny Pickett was gone. Veteran safety nets quietly removed. Some saw it as standard roster management. Others viewed it as stripping away support from a young quarterback who could have used experienced voices in the huddle. Again, nothing was officially confirmed, but the timing raised eyebrows. What made the situation more uncomfortable was Stefanski's refusal to acknowledge any missteps. He never suggested starting Sanders earlier might have helped, never hinted that the rollout could have been handled differently. Instead, every decision was framed as intentional, thoughtful, correct. To fans, that sounded less like confidence and more like deflection. Because admitting a mistake doesn't weaken leadership, ignoring one does. And as the season wore on, the Browns' messaging felt increasingly disconnected from reality. They were asking fans to trust explanations that didn't match what they were watching. That's where the private doubts lived, not in wild conspiracy theories, but in unanswered questions. Why did Sanders have to prove himself repeatedly, while others were given patience? Why did his biggest moments come with an asterisk? Why did success feel temporary instead of foundational? Publicly, everything was fine. Privately, trust was eroding. And once trust cracks, even good intentions start to look suspicious. That's the danger Cleveland found itself in. Because whether the issues were caused by dysfunction, stubbornness, or something more calculated, the result was the same. A quarterback playing under a microscope, a fan base divided, and a storyline that refused to fade away. By the time the dust settled, the wristband incident in Chicago wasn't being talked about as a mistake anymore. It had become a symbol, not because of what the wristband was, but because of what it represented. A moment so simple, so avoidable, that it stripped away every remaining excuse. Bad play calling can be debated. Game management decisions can be defended. Even questionable personnel choices can be explained away with long-term planning. But sending a starting quarterback onto the field without the correct play information crosses a different line. That's not philosophy. That's procedure. And procedures are supposed to be the one thing NFL organizations never get wrong. That's why fans couldn't move past it. The wristband forced people to reconsider everything that came before it. The lack of reps, the strange substitutions, the moments where momentum died without explanation. All of it suddenly felt connected, not necessarily by intent, but by neglect. And neglect is harder to forgive than failure. Kevin Stefanski insisted afterward that Shedeur Sanders would remain the starter. When asked directly, he didn't hesitate. Absolutely. He spoke about growth, about ups and downs, about learning curves. On the surface, it sounded supportive, but the timing mattered. That commitment came after the damage was already done. Because trust isn't built through words, it's built through consistency. Now, every evaluation of Sanders carries an asterisk. Every interception is viewed through a different lens. Every stalled drive sparks the same question. Was he put in the best position to succeed? Fair or not, that question won't disappear. The wristband ensured it wouldn't. With 3 games left on the schedule, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, the stakes feel heavier than they should. These aren't just games anymore. They're referendums. On Sanders' future, on Stefanski's credibility, on whether Cleveland has learned anything from decades of quarterback instability. And no matter how Sanders plays, the debate won't be clean. If he struggles, critics will point to Chicago. If he shines, supporters will ask why it took so long to fully trust him. That's the trap the organization created. The most unsettling part is how familiar this feels. Cleveland has seen this movie before. Talented quarterbacks entering chaotic systems. Promises made too late. Confidence eroded quietly. Fans don't want to believe this is happening again, but the wristband made it impossible to ignore. Somewhere in Soldier Field, that piece of plastic was probably tossed away without a second thought, forgotten by the people who handled it. But what it symbolized won't disappear so easily. It became the moment where plausible deniability ended. And now the question hanging over the Browns isn't complicated. It's unavoidable. If this organization truly wanted Shedeur Sanders to succeed, why does every critical moment seem to work against him? At some point, every story stops being about one game, one decision, or one mistake. It becomes about what people believe they're seeing. That's where this situation now lives. Because the wristband didn't just raise questions about preparation, it reopened a wound Cleveland fans know all too well. For years, the Browns have cycled through quarterbacks with the same result. Promise, turmoil, excuses, reset. Each era starts with optimism and ends with finger-pointing. That history is why this moment hit so hard. Fans didn't just see a rookie struggling in Chicago. They saw a familiar pattern trying to take shape again. Shedeur Sanders now carries more than just a playbook. He carries expectation, skepticism, and a narrative that wasn't fully of his making. Every throw is judged not just on execution, but on circumstance. Was the call right? Was the setup fair? Was he trusted? That's an exhausting way to develop a quarterback, and everyone knows it. Kevin Stefanski has insisted the right things publicly. He sees progress. He believes in growth. He says Sanders is the guy. But belief isn't something you declare once controversy hits. It's something you demonstrate consistently, especially when the spotlight isn't flattering. And that's where doubt still lingers. Because fans aren't asking for perfection. They're asking for clarity, for accountability, for moments that make sense. The frustration comes from watching decisions that feel disconnected from performance and explanations that feel smaller than the moments they're meant to explain. With 3 games left, the outcome almost feels secondary. Wins won't erase the questions. Losses won't answer them. Whatever happens next will be viewed through the lens Chicago created. That's the reality now. And that's why this story won't end quietly. If Sanders succeeds, people will argue he did it despite the chaos. If he fails, they'll ask whether he was ever given a real chance. Either way, the organization doesn't escape scrutiny. The wristband ensured that. So the question remains, hanging over every snap and every press conference. Not framed as an accusation, not shouted as a conspiracy, just lingering, unresolved, and impossible to ignore. Was Shedeur Sanders developed with intention, or managed with uncertainty? Because until that question is answered honestly, nothing else in Cleveland truly moves forward.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.